Thank you so much, Daniel, for the introduction and for the invitation to join you here in Seoul. And thank you very especially to Tammy, Tamara, and everyone else at the team for putting together this wonderful gathering. I'm incredibly excited for the next few days to getting to exchange experiences and learning with and from each other. This seems like quite a perfect convening an opportunity. And I wanted to start by anchoring my presentation, reflecting on this theme of artist sustenance or art for sustenance, and why it feels so relevant and so timely to me right now. As Daniel said, I'm the director of artist programs at the Joan Mitchell Foundation. This is an artist endowed foundation, so it means that artist Joan Mitchell, before she died, she decided to donate, her work, anything she possessed, to create a foundation to support other artists. And in my role in particular, I oversee a fellowship, which I'm going to talk about in a little while. But the other program that I oversee is called Creating a Living Legacy, and it basically supports artists in thinking about their legacy planning. And, in the last year, I started mapping a little bit of the field in the United States to understand how to support artists in general around this work. And I've created an advisory council. And we were meeting recently in I think maybe the first meeting that we had as an advisory council. Josh Franco, the head of collections at the Smithsonian Archives of American Art, a colleague and a participant in the council, we were asking everyone, why do we do this work? Why do you do this work? What drives you? And something that he shared that I thought was kind of perfect to bring here into the room was that he recently learned that in most ancient cave art, what people used as a pigment binder was animal fat. And again, I'm sure this won't be news to many of you, but as I said, I'm not an academic, I'm a practitioner, and it was certainly fascinating to me to know that, 30, 40,000 years ago, people were already making the very intentional, strong choice of prioritizing the use of animal fat to make a mark on a cave, to tell a story rather than, sustenance for their bodies, either through warmth or through food. How amazing is that? And it just goes to prove that for almost as long as humans have been eating and procreating and making homes and communities, we've been making marks. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, if we were to do, a spectrum of hope and despair, the other thing why this overarching theme felt so timely is actually the current situation in Argentina. And let me share a little bit. I know this country is very far away. It's a country that has been faced with significant economic challenges for most of its history, in particular the last decade. But just last year, we had an inflation of over 140%. Right now, numbers say that about 45% of its population is living under the poverty line. And in that context, last December, Argentinians elected a new president, who you can see here in this picture. His name is Javier Milei, and he's a self-described anarcho-capitalist libertarian who basically promised a dramatic shakeup of the government by literally chainsawing any unneeded costs. As soon as he got sworn in, then he passed an executive order, which means that he basically was trying to bypass Congress, aimed at executing what he calls the largest reform ever, including prices deregulation, the privatization of core strategic public companies, and the reverting of many of the protections for minorities, which have been, very recent accomplishments of social movements. And in that context, he has been attacking culture and art very directly. He has proposed to close the National Institute of Theatre, the National Funds of the Arts, and the Institute of Cinema, which has resulted in extensive layoffs and canceling of new grants and programming and any type of support for artists throughout the country, the deregulation even of bookselling activity and systems for copyright protection. And in all of these, his repeated tagline has been, there simply is no money. Culture and arts are a privilege, a superfluous expense. They have no value. And in his mind, in order for something to be valuable and worthy, it needs to be utilitarian. It needs to be successful solely in market terms. And art and culture are not necessarily that. What's interesting is that the system of autonomous agencies, which was created starting in 1958 and is basically a model for the region and has been quoted, as one of the amazing support systems for culture and art in the world. It's basically funded by commercial activity in their respective sectors. So it not only organizes and supports the development of, growing industries and less commercially oriented ventures, but it also allows to expand and offer that would otherwise be, and still is, to be honest, extremely concentrated in Buenos Aires and its surroundings. In fact, if we look at the numbers, we'd verify that on top of its obvious symbolic importance and its key role as identity building, culture is essential to the country's GDP, to its job and tourism markets, and to develop resources in multiple ways. So you can see people have been protesting, particularly artists throughout the world. And this brings me to a different yet key point that Milei has shared on Twitter, which is, his place of choice to communicate with the world. What he says here basically is that for him, the root of the Argentine problem is not political or economic, it's moral. And that he feels the need to wage a cultural battle against education, culture, and media as sources of that moral defeat. What I think we're witnessing here, unfortunately, is not a battle, but an annihilation of two very uneven powers, one in particular with the sum of the public power as a president of a country can get. This, of course, is not new nor uniquely happening in Argentina. It's actually happening around the world. So it felt really, really important to bring it into the room as we coalesce as a field, as we think together these days, not in our bubble, but bringing the world here to make sure that we have this context in mind as we discuss ideas, proposals, and research work that we're doing. Basically, what we see through all of this is that the underinvestment and the disinvestment is not only towards arts support structures and organizations, as I was just sharing in Argentina, but also on artists directly. Milei, in fact, outwardly attacked popular artists, from teen music sensations to well-known actors, saying that they have been profiting from the government for years without any transparency, producing no value. In spite of that, many of these artists are not only incredibly successful in the country, but also in Spain, throughout all of Latin America, So it's clearly not true, right? But that was also the case, of the National Endowment for the Arts in the 90s during the infamous culture wars in the United States. And that's why many organizations, such as the Joan Mitchell Foundation, were created. Yet I can personally attest that artists are catalysts for the creative process and conduits for societal conversation. As my dear friend and colleague Susi del Valle says, and I wanted to quote her because she wrote it in a much better way than I ever could. Artists are truth seekers and storytellers. They create, translate, and illuminate. They influence, inspire, and build movements. When we need to escape the news and the day's events, we sink into a moving work of art or performance or film or book, and it restores us. When we need to find a way to process what's happening in the world, we look to the artists who transport us. They remind us that we're human and they connect us to one another. Again. Before her, I started working in philanthropy. I spent the last decade as an engagement professional in cultural organizations. In fact, all the pictures that I'm showing here are from projects that I've been involved with, worked with artists, curated, commissioned. My goal was to promote what I call, or what is called, better said, cultural democracy. And in order to do this, I organized engagement programs that were inclusive, that created conditions for active participation, and whenever possible, for co-creation. Not to be too self-referential, but the article that I collaborated on for the Journal of Arts and Society looks at how artists are at the core of the work organizations need to do in current times to break their crisis of relevance, representation, and leadership. Why? Because artists are part of the communities we're interested in connecting with, and they usually have a direct line of communication and a unique sensitivity and understanding of how they operate, what the issues that matter to them are, and how to cultivate relationship with those communities. They also have the ability to become ambassadors of the organization within the community and advocates of the community within the organizations. And finally, because collaborating with artists transmutes the dialogue between organizations and their audiences into a discourse that is enriched by diverse lived experiences and modes of thinking. I basically look in that article at all of the limits of engagement curating in large organizations and how, at the end of the day, the only loophole I've found is to partner with artists. Also, artists are unburdened by institutional constraints. Artists emerge then as agents of innovation, prompting new avenues of thought, management, and engagement. They also have a singular capacity for critical thinking, for dissecting, contextualizing, and articulating the world we live in, as well as envisioning alternative futures where people can thrive. They can generate immersive, sensitive, and meaningful encounters. The effect is that artists often provide broader audiences with a model of action that resonates more profoundly than that of any institution. This has meant working with artists as partners, as I was saying, offering them a platform, support, and as much freedom and agency as possible. This also means, of course, by, as a basis, compensating them fairly, but also, more difficult, embracing the value of divergent viewpoints, creating an environment where artists can assert their unique perspectives, champion their chosen causes, and navigate their creative journeys unimpeded. Even, or especially when, that looks like institutional critique. It has demanded a reconsideration of organizational norms and the frameworks that sustain them, necessitating arts administrators to embrace and protect artists from the discomfort that can often emerge from these processes, particularly in organizations that prioritize outcomes, tangible objects, aesthetics, and unwavering consistency and homogeneity. By way of example, I wanted to share with you the story of one individual artist and the journey we took together when I was at the Shed. This is Troy Anthony. He's a composer, a singer, a writer, and a director from Kentucky originally. He just turned 30 years old. So when I got to work with him, he was much younger. As I said, I originally met him when I was the director of creative practice and social impact at the Shed, which is multidisciplinary commissioning organization in the west side of Manhattan. It's a new organization that opened in 2019. And Troy got selected as part of the first iteration of a program called Open Call, which was the organization's way of connecting with a diversity of communities and artists throughout New York City through inviting new or emerging artists who had never had the opportunity to show work at an organization of this size, to present new or ambitious projects. And those would get selected through decentralizing the curatorial voice. So basically inviting artists and producers, curators from around the city, about 60 people, to help us select. Troy got selected with a piece called Antioch Mass, which was a very unique take on the imagined queer relationship between Peter and Jesus. And it was to be presented in the summer of 2020. But of course, we all know what happened next. This is the group of selected artists as part of Open Call. And here I want to speak a little bit about precisely what happened during COVID. You know, our priority as a team and as an organization was to support artists. And in particular, in the context of COVID, where all of their pieces and all of their projects were getting canceled or delayed, we understood that they were a particularly sensitive population because they work gig to gig, paycheck to paycheck, and most times have no safety nets or access to unemployment or health insurance. So I proposed to use the model of commissioning that the organization was so keen in to create a digital commissioning series called Up Close, whose first commission came out to the public on April 19th. So just 5 weeks after our organization had closed its doors to the public. This was the opportunity to provide artists with a fee, and, you know, with a possibility to work, to create and explore what it meant to think about the world and make art right at this moment. And for most of them, it was also the first time they got to experiment with digital media. So it was also an interesting opportunity to experiment. We worked with close to 40 artists who were part of 15 commissions over 18 months. Commissions varied from poetry to music, dance, film, and in-depth conversations. And they expressed fear, anguish, loss, but also collaboration, care, and the tenacity of joy as resistance. And they got us all through. Troy was one of the very first artists I thought of inviting as I started conceptualizing this series. He had met Jerome Ellis, who is to the right of the screen. Jerome is also a musician and composer. They had met as Troy was doing a little composing residency before his piece, and Jerome was collaborating in a piece by Claudia Rankin. And then it had told me in passing that, that day, as they met, they had started playing around and composed a song together. And that evening they had played it actually at the Public Theater, where I think Jerome had a gig at Joe's Pub. And so, immediately I thought, what would it be like to invite these two artists to collaborate? When we called them, Jerome's grandfather had just passed away. And because of the limitations that COVID had created, he hadn't been able to go say goodbye to his grandfather in person. He has a large family. So he had recorded and sent a saxophone solo rendition of The Sparrow and sent it to his family. Troy and Jerome began literally passing notes, which is also the name of their piece. And this game or this dialogue resulted in a 2-hour-long ritual following the stages of grief, centering those most affected by COVID-19. It was so intimate, so vulnerable, of such power and beauty that anyone who attended was transformed. And let me share with you a tiny bit of a video that they created to reflect on the project.
What's up, friend?
Hello, my friend.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Passing Notes is a live virtual music ritual for mourning, communion, and healing.
We wanted to come together and remember the people who we're losing at this moment, and making space in a time when people are not able to make space. Hi friends, my name is Troy Anthony. It's so lovely, as we're here together to see the faces, people that we know and that we don't know.
Troy and I have been talking about the injustices that are both new and unique to COVID, but also expose very old injustices, specifically upon Black and Brown communities.
To, kind of deal with the realities of where we are, processing that, and also healing in community. Passing Notes is about people who have passed away and honoring and remembering them. It's also about the nature of the collaboration that Jerome and I have. We are literally passing notes, an email.
Musical notes, music about the passing of others. Because of this situation, we have been collaborating virtually, so we've been passing music back and forth.
I make a video that then he responds to with the video that maybe I respond to again. And there's this layering process that happens.
There's a collaboration between Troy and I, but also between Troy and I and the Shed. I'm grateful for the trust that the Shed has placed in us.
The artists have decided not to make the recording public because it was so intimate, but instead they have allowed only the most performative sections, focusing on them, to be shared. And I cannot recommend enough going to the Shed's website and bawling to Troy's rendition of A Lost Sheep and Jerome's version of The Sparrow. So you can find that on the website. On October 2020, the Shed finally reopened its doors, and we were able to start planning our open call presentations for the summer of 2021. By then, Troy decided that he needed to create a completely new piece altogether. And as nerve-wracking as that was, as a producing team, we wholeheartedly supported him. And he came to us with a Juneteenth revival called "It Is Our Duty," which followed on itself the format of a church service. And as part of the process of putting it together, he decided to integrate a choir with non-professional voices. So with our help and what he calls the church technology, which is like a word of mouth communication, he got to work with 25 singers, which he did an intensive with, and a week of intensive rehearsals. And he created this beautiful piece, which was like participating literally in a ritual. And I wanted to share a very, very short video of one little piece of it, where audiences were literally invited to get to the stage and clean their sorrows.
Bring your sorrow, bring your pain, let your broken heart remain. Bring your stigma, bring your shame. Healing spirit, fill this place. Bring your sorrow, bring your sorrow, bring your. Come down to the altar. Bring your pain. Let your broken heart. Let your broken. Let it remain. Bring your. Bring your shame. Bring your shame. Spirit free. Won't you feel this breath? I cannot stress how much learning went into making this on all parts. By this time, Troy had never done a professional piece. He, had a 9-to-5 job. He had never created a budget or a timeline. We had to sit with him to help him do that, to explain how to work in a union house. But what we gave ourselves, both parties, was the space and the flexibility to innovate and crucially to fail. A space that acknowledges failure not as a setback, but as an opportunity for growth and learning. And the deep trust and care for him as a leader and a change maker. On the other hand, and maybe it is precisely his naivete, his deep commitment to the communities he felt he was representing through his work, and by all means, a deep belief in his work, also made Troy push at every step. And us as an organization need to adapt and be flexible and agree many times to things we had never agreed to before. So it was really a groundbreaking project for all of us. So much so that after the performance and without a model or even an excuse for it, the only question left for us was, what's next? We literally sat down with Troy and asked him. And what Troy wanted next was to create an actual choir, a citywide choir centering queer Black voices, which is now in existence and called the Fire Ensemble, and that could be incubated at the Shed. So we created a contract for a 3-year residency for Troy and an incubation of the choir, providing rehearsals for 6 months out of the year, 2 public presentations in 2022 and 2023. He's currently working on a publication about it, just
he's hoping to share with other artists how an artist can collaborate with an organization of that size and in that way, and going through a lot of the lessons learned, because it wasn't easy. And, you know, the Sheds team was in change permanently transformed as well, in the way it understood collaborations with artists, in the freedom that we were willing to provide them, in the deep understanding that artists are the ones who best know and can represent communities' idiosyncrasies and their needs and potentials. Now, I've been for almost 2 years at the Joan Mitchell Foundation. And although, you know, I miss getting to work side by side with artists to create projects, I'm really excited to deepen the opportunity to support artists throughout their careers, and to get to intentionally design and execute initiatives geared toward helping them sustain their practices in a different way. As I said, this is a fellowship that is national in scope. So we work with artists from all different states and territories. We provide them with unrestricted financial support for $60,000 that gets paid over 5 years. We also, the key to this is that it's unrestricted. So it assumes that artists are best suited for defining what they should spend that money on. And this is kind of inspired in what is called trust philanthropy, which is intended to mend some of the wounds that philanthropy historically has inflicted by pretending a level of control or of, you know, what's called return on investment that has actually not proven beneficial in the ways that it pretended to be. But beyond this, I've also noted the need for a radical shift. You know, trust, as crucial as it may be, needs a deeper and transformative vision of care. So we are thinking about how we invest in these people as people, 360, in their skills, their leadership, their capacity building, their health, their safety, but also their personal relationships, their well-being, their emotions, their validation. What we realize is that there's a lot of work around recovering and healing from the relentless strains of their work. So what we're building is a community of practice. And, you know, there is no blueprint to being an artist. So what I keep telling them is that what is most important and what we can leave behind to them is their relationship to each other. We act as a convening, as a hub, but we don't want to direct that. So we offer literally two in-person convenings over those 5 years, always with the person's cohort, and then 1 year with the one of the previous year and 1 year with the one of the successive year. We have also created, we've realized that those are mostly for, you know, relationship building and for putting in practice some of the skills that they learned, but not as a learning space. So we've decentralized that learning throughout the year in virtual ways. We've also created what we call artist exchanges, so opportunities for them to do some peer advisory, to crowdsource solutions to some of the issues that they find, to talk about some of the themes that come up in conversation. We basically have 3 areas of learning: financial literacy and planning, self-advocacy, and legacy planning. So we also offer one-on-one consultations with some of the leaders of those workshops, but also with other people they might be wanting to connect with, or they can come to us and say, like, I'm interested in this area of work, and we can find someone for them. And finally, this year, we've implemented what we call office hours, which is basically time in our calendars to meet with us, to review an application, to, again, vent, problem solve whatever they might need. We all are coming from the field, so we can be good interlocutors and advisors. And as I said, we are interested in creating repair, but also in building deep, long-lasting relationships instead of transactional ones, and building capacity instead of dependence. So a lot of what we talk about is working with instead of working for. And this is more in the line of what is called the philanthropy of care, which understands that by investing in the care of those we serve, we move beyond superficial support to create a compassionate force that propels artists not just to survive, but to thrive and amplify their impact. We have therefore been rebuilding our team, leading the change from within, thinking about how to be agile, robust, and trustworthy. How do we express the diversity of the artists that we want to serve? How do we focus on their well-being, and in mission alignment and commitment? Finally, I wanted to close coming back to where we started. As I went more in depth into this idea of animal fat as binder, and why would people have really prioritized to create these marks? It's still a mystery why people made these marks in caves, but there seems to be somewhat of a consensus among anthropologists that believe it was a way of conjuring the spirits of the animals, so that if you were able to capture them in the images you painted, you would have a successful hunt. So artists in that sense were kind of shamans, for the tribe, the conduits for capturing those spirits and moving the energy around. In other words, there was a belief that what artists are able to accomplish through their work could get replicated in the terrestrial world. And I kind of still see that as a possibility with social change. So to me, that is ultimately what art for and as sustenance is all about. Thank you.